A lot of Europeans doubt that there is enough space for Chinese civil society to flourish, and I think it's a legitimate point of view. At the same time, we know that there are reformers who want to give Chinese citizens more voice in public policy making and implementation. So by sharing European experiences through dialogue and cooperation, we can actively support Chinese civil society organizations.
Seven organizations from Europe and China have embarked on a journey of collaboration. They will implement 8 dialogues, 2 international conferences, and 16 participatory public policy initiatives.
UN COP15 conference, the so-called last chance to save the planet, two-way conference, did not produce any legally binding document. The Copenhagen Accord was not passed unanimously. A lot of people start to doubt about conferences and forums as EU-China dialogue can yield possible results. About the achievements of this dialogue, Patrick Vlachenko said,
often issues are maybe not discussed directly in dialogue between the Europeans and the Chinese, which are here this time. So in this respect, the dialogue is still not as intense or as good as I would hope.
有的人呢，恐怕是被动的来参加这个问题，他参加这个会议啊，他事先没有考虑到一定的问题，那他也就很少能获得一定的有用的这个方案或者信息。
I think the challenge now is that a lot of them are sort of very generalized, and they aren't sort of concrete, actionable stuff, and so as people are sort of still thinking that this is just sort of an activity.
Stephen also thinks that some European NGOs join this dialogue in their own interests.
从某个角度来讲，每个人每个组织都是为了自己的利益而进行活动的嘛。虽然他会给我们很多的资助，给我们很多的帮助。 但他绝不会是那种非常慷慨的慈善家。
There are some gaps between Europe and China.
So the discussions or the issues in China and Europe are still quite different. For Europe, the consumption aspect is more important, the lifestyles, as well as the idea about we need a system change, and these are discussions that maybe you don't have so much in China in terms of lifestyles. For example, here in China, the industrial pollution, improving the efficiency of companies, this is very much one of the very urgent issues that need to be tackled.
About the transparency of media on climate change, Chinese journalist Chijin said,
I think climate change is only one of the subjects. Actually, journalists in China can cover lots of subjects, but with some limits. I think there are some other subjects such as entertainment, sports that will have less limits. Climate change, because it's not only a scientific subject now. It is related to bilateral relations and related to international politics. And of course there are limits and of course there are positions.
Given many concerns being raised, lots of participants believe that this dialogue could be very successful. About the topics and the contents.
The topic we had yesterday was climate change, so we had the representatives of government there, so it was all very formal. Today the topic is sustainable consumption and production, and the link between these two is that sustainable consumption and production offers many concrete solutions to addressing climate change.
About the significance of this dialogue.
It's very important to have this dialogue because one of the really big issues is that very often the people on the ground, the grassroots people who have an interest in the environment or an environmental issue, they don't get their views known very clearly, or they can't communicate them further up the management chain to the politicians. So this sort of thing is actually very interesting because we've got a mixture of NGOs and political types and ministry types. So it's actually it's really good to get people talking, just chatting about issues.
And I know people get frustrated with the time it takes to reach international agreements and the problems at Copenhagen and Cancun and Kyoto and whatever, but we've got to tackle this issue.
About the reasons.
As a scientist, there's a lot of focus on the nitty-gritty, counting the number of worms, counting the amount of coral there, but actually trying to protect that requires a political framework to sort of bring in the legislation and bring in the laws and to enforce the protection of those environmental things, habitats and species and so on. So this is actually a very interesting meeting.
About the outcome of this dialogue.
关于说是这个它的作用或者它的结果会是怎么样子的，我觉得先不要否定它吧，不应该说是一种怀疑的态度吧。可能推动起来是有点困难，但是最起码这是一个契机嘛。
Public engagement.
And conferences like this, which bring together civil society as well as governments to discuss what people can do, what organisations can do, what all of us can do, even in a small way. It's very important to do it. We've got to carry on having international negotiations. China and Europe have got to work together. In fact, it's vital that China and Europe work together to jointly lead this process. Because without Europe it won't happen, and without China it won't happen.
公众参与下，大家可以从各个不同的角度和层面来叙述这个问题。
Upon communication between Europe and China.
Actually, in one of my group is really interesting, and they have more Chinese, and that they have a European, and then they have a really intimacy and intensive conversation. I think in this process we increase quite a lot of understanding. Personally, I feel that it's quite wonderful, and I feel that the atmosphere is really good, and people like to talk.
The relationship between government and civil society.
会场里面也有中国政府的一些官员，我们也能够去了解一下政府这一方面的态度，还有政策，还有以及我们之间应该有一个什么样的交流的一个模式。
Therefore, even though people have some concerns of this kind of dialogue between Europe and China, they believe that such platform of communication helps understanding of different classes.